Hello, my name is Jeremy with Faithful Guardian Training Center, and today we're going to be talking about strokes. The big thing that you need to know about strokes is that it is essentially a disruption of blood flow to the brain. And this is often going to cause a loss of function, whether it be speech, mobility, understanding, anything that your brain controls. A stroke can definitely affect it. And not all strokes are the same. Not all strokes are going to present the same. There's two main types of strokes. You have an ischemic stroke and a hemorrhagic stroke. An ischemic stroke, that is whenever the blood flow is disrupted by a clot. For example, if you have somebody who has AFib, for example, which is atrial fibrillation, which is where your heart is essentially not functioning like it's supposed to, and it starts creating clots. Well, if one of those clots becomes free-floating and it gets sent up to the brain, you have a clot that is lodged in the brain. Everything past that point where that clot gets lodged is no longer able to make function or to be able to participate in the function of your typical day-to-day life. And this is going to cause cerebral ischemia and potentially cerebral infarction. Now, they're not always going to be the same signs. It just kind of depends on where that clot gets lodged at. Another thing is, it's typically, if you have a stroke on the left side of your brain, so an ischemic stroke on the left side, you're typically going to have right-sided weakness. You can have right-sided facial droop, right-sided weakness, left-sided facial droop, right-sided weakness. It all just kind of depends. And you just kind of have to let your assessments guide your treatments. But again, the side of the brain that's affected is always going to be the opposite side of the body. So if I have my left side of my brain gets affected, right-sided weakness. If the right side of my brain gets affected, left-sided weakness. Now, the other type of stroke is going to be a hemorrhagic stroke. You're typically going to see this in patients who have uncontrolled hypertension, or they may be under a lot of stress, or be taking blood thinners especially. And it occurs whenever you have a rupture of a blood vessel in the brain. This can typically be due to baryaneurysms or aneurysms in general. And it is essentially, you just have a disruption of the blood vessel that causes it to bleed inside the brain. And this is going to end up leading to everything past that point where that clot, or not where the clot, but where the bleed occurred. It's not going to be able to participate in your neurological function, and it's going to eventually become ischemic and infarcted. Now, these are typically going to be described as the worst headaches of your life, and then they're going to have a sudden, rapid decrease in their level of consciousness. Now, these types of patients, you're also going to have signs of increased intracranial pressure. So if you have somebody who has completely stable vital signs, so for example, a blood pressure of 120/80, heart rates in the 90s, 80s, their O2 saturation is relatively normal, but they are presenting with signs and symptoms of stroke, it's likely going to be an ischemic stroke. If you have somebody that has a blood pressure well over 200, their heart rate is below 60, they're unconscious, and they're not breathing really well, those are typically going to be signs of a hemorrhagic stroke, because those are also signs of intracranial pressure increase. And so each type of stroke, you kind of need to be able to identify. Does this mean that every hemorrhagic stroke is going to present with those same signs and symptoms I mentioned a second ago? That is not true. It just depends on the severity of the bleed, where the bleed is, and how everything gets affected. So a term that I've used a good bit in this video so far is ischemic tissue versus infarcted tissue. Ischemic tissue is essentially tissue that is hypoxic. If you were to give that tissue a little bit of oxygen, it would heal right back up, and there would be minimal, if any, deficit due to the tissue hypoxia. Once a certain tissue has been hypoxic for an extended period of time, that tissue becomes infarcted, And infarcted tissue is essentially dead tissue, and it's not able to participate in any neurological functions. Doesn't matter how much oxygen it gets, doesn't matter how much nutrients it gets, it's just not going to work anymore. And you can have ischemic and infarcted tissue with both types of strokes, both ischemic strokes and hemorrhagic strokes. Right? So just to recap, ischemic strokes, those are due to clots. Hemorrhagic strokes, those are going to be due to bleeds within the brain. And they can both lead to ischemic tissue or infarcted tissue. And those are your strokes.